I think the biggest thing I've seen over the last year is the growth of podcasts in the programmatic space. That's primarily been driven by brand suitability and brand safety partners like Barometer and Sounder coming into the space as a third party and allowing advertisers who are always afraid of the podcast space to now dip their toe in the water, see how that channel can provide a significant ROI improvement versus their normal audio buys. And then start to test different audiences, right? I mean, we're on a podcast now, but I think 2 years ago, people were afraid of the long tail podcasts. But in reality, those audiences have a tremendous value for brands, right? That mid to long tail creator doesn't get a seat at the table with some of these big shops now because of the download numbers or the bandwidth to service the show. But I think that's the next evolution in technology. We need to see how do we enable those podcast creators to speak one to one to their audience, because that's where brands are going to see that significant uplift.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing Podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the Marketing Association. I also run an agency, a brand, an incubator, and a nonprofit. So wear a lot of hats in the digital marketing world. One of the things that is a hot topic this year is the continued expansion of addressability within the ecosystem. And so that's one of the reasons I'm super excited to be chatting with Brian Conlan today, who runs a DAX in the United States. So, Brian, why don't we start off with the fact that you just got back from CES, and CES has become increasingly something that goes way beyond consumer electronics to the point where there's everybody in media is there. So, what
Sure.
were the hot talking points there?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on, Kevin. It's great to join you today. But as we talked on, CES has become a little bit of a conference adjacent to the Consumer Electronics Show, where now the media landscape takes over the ARIA and Cosmo for the week and just kind of talks about the key trends and what's ahead for the year. I think the hot topic this past show was AI, as it's always been recently, as everyone's kind of talking about how do we take AI and incorporate it into our offerings to make smarter decisions for our advertisers. You saw Viant, a major DSP partner, announce agentic buying. You've seen partners like Microsoft do that as well over the past 6 months. So we're seeing this automated buying becoming a bigger trend in the programmatic landscape. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on and ensure your supply is addressable so that way it can properly be read by the AI agents and make the best decision for the advertiser at the end of the day. And then I think it's just as you talked about before, just the addressability of audio. I think audio as a channel has always been talking about how do we get a better seat at the table for these marketers. It's 30% of a consumer's day, but 5% of the budgets. I've heard that ad nauseum, but I do finally believe like we're getting closer and closer to moving that needle higher from an investment standpoint. And that's because of the growth of digital audio, right? There's more identifiers and signals now that advertisers can use to align with their overall audience messaging. So those were, I think, some of the key topics at CES. But it's just great way to start the year. A little scary, I would say, to be honest with you, with a lot of meetings right after the holidays. But it does kind of re-energize you and let you know that you're in a growing, evolving space and with some great people across the industry. So it was a great show, and looking forward to what's ahead this year.
So, given the fact that, you sort of had mentioned that audio hasn't gotten the seat at the table that it deserves, do you feel like that means that for at least a short window of opportunity, there are some really amazing deals as it relates to the ability to get reach and impact into the audio ecosystem, where media buyers who perhaps hadn't considered adding programmatic audio in should really take advantage of that opportunistic buying?
Yeah, and I think for me, what the learning from last week and just in general has been is like I think it's a little bit of an education tour that we need to provide to media buyers because yes, audio is getting a seat within these programmatic buys, but audio doesn't behave the exact same way you see CTV and display, right? Audio has been known historically for reach, brand building, that consistent messaging with your desired frequency to hit that consumer and convert them to a win for advertisers, where I think people are kind of taking the same approach now because they don't understand the audio landscape in prior experience that they just put it with the rest of the omni-channel approach, and it doesn't work the same way, right? So I think that was one of the things I took away was, yes, it's more addressable now. That's great. But it's not just the value of audio, it's how to use audio effectively to make sure that you're maximizing the ROI for your campaign. How do you look at waste? How do you look at ideal frequency by channel? And make sure that you're looking at the household as a whole to drive that consumer to a purchase, which is what all advertisers want at the end of the day. So, yes, there's deals to be had, but I also think there's some more education that needs to happen, given some conversations we had last week and recently out in the industry.
So, I mean, in the early days of broadcast audio, right, you figured out which audience it was based on the genre, based on the time of
Sure,
day. I mean, drive time was called drive time because people were driving, right? And
of
so,
course.
now obviously with addressability, you still have all the other layers that existed then with regards to understanding genre and what are the people listening to that would telegraph things about demographics or psychographics, but you have the addressability layer. So as media buyers think about those at the intersection of the addressability with sort of all the old ways of thinking about audio advertising from the broadcast days, what do you think is the right way for them to frame it as they think about mid funnel, upper funnel, or direct response, or is it really a more holistic?
I think it's going to vary by client, right? Based on what their outcomes are going to be. I mean, there's going to be some new DR companies that are going to want to kind of look at that upper funnel brand building awareness. And then there's going to be some advertisers that are looking to drive a new product or hit that new consumer base. So the approach is going to vary client to client. But I think what we need to be doing is leaning into the data, right? I think as you touched like on, it was all the historical Nielsen and the radar ratings of what genres performed best for the certain demographic you're looking to reach. But now with the growth of the digital channels, there's more data at our fingertips more than ever. And how do you lean into that and use AI as a tool to evaluate that data to make smarter buying decisions? That's where we're really going to see the evolution in the space, right? I think every supply partner and ad technology that's servicing the actual delivery of the creative is passing back multiple data points. I mean, here at DAX, we provide DSPs over 50 individual data points to make their buying decisions easier, right? So it's about how do you collectively aggregate that, look at it from an audio lens, and then also look at it across the entire buying channel and say, okay, well, what's working in audio? How do I lean in more to that? And can I pull from other channels that may not be providing the same ROI? So I think it's a little bit, that's going to vary depending on the client versus a overarching approach.
So, for folks who aren't used to thinking about audio in a programmatic way, above and beyond the addressability, are there other targeting levers that you find end up being really, really valuable? For example, zip code levels tell you a whole lot about an individual, right? So is geography the
Sure.
thing? Is it day part? What are the other targeting levers that you see media buyers using effectively with programmatic audio?
I think there's a few things that people are leveraging to make programmatic buying more effective and also easier, right? I think when we first launched digital audio as a channel, it was always the bandwidth of servicing these clients, right? They wanted to dive into a local zip code or DMA targeting approach, and it was manual labor for scheduling campaigns by individual DMAs, right? And it just cost a lot of money for publishers to do that. The evolution of programmatic has allowed now advertisers to do that across one campaign with dynamic creative. They can pixel by market to see which market's driving the best ROI. So I think that's just been one of the big evolutions is just the advancement of technology, which always happens when you see a problem, somebody's going to find a solution for that to make their business model out of it. But again, I think it's providing advertisers the ability to do that through a single activation, right? I think we talk about the audio landscape as a whole, and it brings tremendous scale. But there are digital audio partners, there's podcast partners, there's individual podcast hosts, all of which deserve a seat at the table. So now you're leveraging ad tech technologies like DAX as an SSP, where we can bring all of that supply through one deal ID for a programmatic buyer, and they can actually see how all of that is performing instead of individual siloed campaigns. It's now being done through one. And I think the biggest thing I've seen over the last year is the growth of podcasts in the programmatic space. That's primarily been driven by brand suitability and brand safety partners like Barometer and Sounder coming into the space as a third party and allowing advertisers who are always afraid of the podcast space to now dip their toe in the water, see how that channel can provide a significant ROI improvement versus their normal audio buys. and then start to test different audiences, right? I mean, we're on a podcast now, but I think 2 years ago, people were afraid of the long tail podcasts, but in reality, those audiences have a tremendous value for brands, right? That mid to long tail creator doesn't get a seat at the table with some of these big shops now because of the download numbers or the bandwidth to service the show. But I think that's the next evolution in technology. We need to see, how do we enable those podcast creators to speak one-to-one to their audience, because that's where brands are going to see that significant uplift, because that audience is tapping in every time you release a podcast or another podcast show releases. They're going to come back week after week, and it's about getting that brand message into those shows to kind of build that trust and see the ROI take off from there.
It's interesting. Within the podcast ecosystem, there are a lot of folks who do video podcasts, but they also understand that the audio should sometimes live on its own, right? And get
Sure,
syndicated
sure,
out separately for more reasons than ever, right? It used to just be, oh, I might have folks who don't want to consume it in video format, but now because of generative engine optimization and the creators wanting the content out there populating the LLMs, they realize
sure.
that having it out in the podcast platform, having something on iTunes and Spotify and the other places they can release it, increases the odds that the content ends up making itself out there into the GEO transcripts.
Of
So
course.
from that perspective, if an advertiser is had been looking, for example, at the video version of a podcast because they felt like, oh, this is the perfect audience, are they not thinking about the fact that there's an audio version right now, even though there is one?
I think it's an interesting topic, right? I think the advertisers are buying the show as a whole, right? I don't think they
Right.
really care where the audience is listening, if it's on a video component or an audio component. But I think it's really on the show creators to kind of tell that value proposition of, we have this audience in the audio and video environment, and selling the value of both channels, right? I think video is highly visual, it's a highly engaged channel, but audio also has its seat at the table. And don't throw that audio in as an added value component where you're just going to be baking it into both mediums, right? It's so I think it's still that education tour, and I think creators understand that video is clearly where the consumption is happening in large numbers, but there's still a value to that audio component. And how do you drive people on your video feeds to the audio experience? Because I, for one, I have very busy days, and there's some days where I don't get to sit down and watch a video at the end of the night, but I can listen on the train on an audio file and kind of engage with the podcast the way that the medium first started, right? So video is definitely here to stay, but I think it's really a matter of trying to talk to that audience, because it's still, the end user is most likely going to be the same. It's just a matter of which the listening habit they're going to use given their day-to-day lives.
I'd love to delve a little bit into something that sort of indirectly drives success that you don't necessarily have control over, but that's
Sure.
that intersection between the targeting of the media and the creative, right? And so
Sure.
obviously you've got the professionally produced creative, which is the way usually people think about, oh, this is a spot, we produced it, we're going to run it, it's a 15, it's a 30, whatever. But
Hmm.
then you've got this thing that it also is sort of a vestige from the radio days, which is the live read, right? But the
Hmm.
live read was always, as it manifested in podcasts, was okay, I'm on Joe Rogan, I'm going to get Joe Rogan to read, his promo, right?
Hmm.
But I've noticed recently that sometimes that's jumping out of the show, right? Whereas now you're essentially licensing the right to use that live read outside of the original podcaster's creative venue into other
Sure.
locations. And so I'd love your thoughts on the importance of that creative in the success of the overall campaign, both as it relates to, this weird intersection of creator campaigns, creator ads breaking out of their show, but also from the perspective of creative burnout, right? Because once you're doing addressability, the heavy consumer is going to burn out on a spot much quicker.
Yeah, so I don't look at it from a burnout standpoint. I think it's for advertisers now having the ability to tap into A-list or B-list celebrities that are now in the podcast space, right? I think for many years, even if you look back to the radio days like you talked about, you would have that top talent that had their syndicated program may do a recording that would be used across the entire network of radio stations or shows that are being syndicated by that specific company. But now, and you're seeing it in the podcast space, it's happening again, right? You can have the Joe Rogan's voice your spot, and you can use it across the wide network. that publisher may be able to bring to the table versus only being tapped into running his messaging in the specific show. And then it presents that brand consistency that you're looking for as an advertiser, where you're hitting that end user maybe across a few different shows, and they're going to continue to hear this messaging, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to go look and see what that brand is all about. So I think sometimes it has a little bit more of a benefit to keep that messaging consistent. The challenge you're going to have is allowing content creators like a Joe Rogan to be airing in competing podcasts, right? That's always the thing that you're going to have to worry about. But if an advertiser can get it to be done, it's a win in the long run, right? It's about telling that consistent messaging and leveraging the talent that people associate and listen to and kind of trust their word. So
So one other thing I'd love your point of view on, and again, it relates back to the ability for an advertiser to continue to buy heavily into a channel, which is getting that right message to the right audience, right? Now,
sure,
obviously, uh, bad creative with great targeting still fails, right? So, and you
sure.
don't control that, but the what are some best practices that you see, especially as it relates to when they're doing additional targeting, when there's a separate segment, at which point do you decide this deserves its own creative? There's the obvious ones like for the Hispanic market, you'll do a
Sure.
separate creative, but there may be other levels of customization that you should do, whether it's hyper localization or whatever, that will make the ad perform better. What should people be thinking about for that?
Yeah, I think from where we sit in the market, we can provide a few different companies that I see doing things well here. But to your point, an advertiser who takes a video spot and just strips the audio out of that and runs it across audio probably isn't getting the most effect out of their campaign. But partners like Frequency, A Million Ads do dynamic creative optimization where you can hyper local target a campaign that has data signals for weather targeting, time of day, location based creative, and then they can create multiple iterations of the audio spot so that end consumer is still getting that one-to-one listening environment, right? It's not that burnout you referenced earlier. It's the fact of, oh, this ad makes sense because it's listening to me, it knows me, and this advertiser is actually taking the effort to make sure that I'm getting hit with refresh creative. I'm going to listen to that more fondly than I am the same messaging time and time again, where you're like, okay, I need a new ad, right? There is creative fatigue. That is a real thing in the audio channel. So partners like Frequency and A Million Ads solve for that by allowing advertisers to do that multiple versions in a matter of minutes with technology. And then I think you've seen companies like Wondercraft and AudioStack on the AI side come into the space, and they're now able to create thousands of spots in a matter of minutes for a tenth of the cost for advertisers. So what used to be a barrier of entry because of the cost, right? You'd have these creative studios that a lot of the agencies work with. They'd say, we can't create 5 different spots. We're going to go with our 2 to 3 normal brand spots. We've now taken that burden off their hands and say, well, you know what? We can still use the core brand spot and then create a 10-second trailer that actually is unique to each individual listener. And we can do that all behind the scenes. You don't even have to lift a finger. And it's actually been very well received. I mean, we've seen online a retail company has used Frequency for a weather triggered campaign, right, where they wanted to serve specific creative when it was raining in a market. We saw over 2 million incremental visitors throughout the campaign, which was like a 17% uplift for the initiative. Like, that messaging really does land with that end consumer. So again, it's about using the technology. Is the kind of theme we talked about since the start here. Is the space is constantly evolving. There's new and innovative products that advertisers can be using. It's just educating on them on what's available. And this can be used across the entire ecosystem. It's not specific to DAX. I think this is really about telling the value of audio and what those partners can truly bring to the table for an advertiser. So.
So there also may be some misconceptions out there as it relates to how big of an advertiser or marketer you need to be to effectively use programmatic audio, and some of the same tools that you talked about, which work fantastically well for a gigantic retailer who's hyper
Sure.
personalizing, right? To some extent, a lot of them could be deployed at a more hyper local level for a smaller advertiser. So at what sort of sweet spot of spend, if a person wants to deploy spend, where does it start to make sense for somebody to investigate programmatic audio?
I think it's not about the spend. I would say it's about the length of time, right? So I think, well, I should take that back. I'd say spend has a factor in it because if you're a national advertiser running $5,000 over 6 weeks, you're not going to make that big of an impact, right? So I think it does really vary where you have to really be honest with what your target customer is. I don't think the barrier of entry is so expensive. It's about using the smart targeting to your capabilities to ensure there is no waste in your campaign. And that's really where programmatic comes into play, right? You're allowing the advertisers within a DSP to layer on geo targeting, audience profiling. So they ensure that if they're going to pay a CPM for that impression, they're hitting that right consumer, right? There is no waste in programmatic. So I think that's the first one, but I think it's about having that 4 to 6 week runway. Some of the things I've seen over my career is an advertiser comes into the space and is like, I'm going to test audio. And then after 4 days, they're like, we're not seeing the ROI that we see in other channels. We're going to pause this campaign. And again, it's on us at DAX and the industry to kind of educate them that there's that 4 to 6 week window that we've seen with third parties like Claritas and Podscribe that talk about that conversion window, right? And it varies by brand, but some may be a 7 day conversion windows, others may be 21. And it's about staying consistent. Give it a month, give it 2 months, and then evaluate it at the end of the campaign. I think advertisers jump so quickly to say, this isn't working, this isn't the right environment for me, because they don't want to waste any ad dollars in today's market. But if you're going to be giving a channel a new shot, I think it's about giving it its proper seat at the table and agreeing to run a certain amount of time. I mean, you said you run an agency. I think you probably see it in your world. There's advertisers that have a little bit more of a higher risk tolerance to let it run its course, and there's other ones that are going to be more sensitive to that. But I honestly believe that audio has proven its value over time across radio, digital, and now podcasting. It's a matter of truly trusting the channel to work for you and giving it some time to let it do its thing. So,
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting because not every advertiser has enough spend in overall and within a channel to do a full MMM, right? So
sure.
when they come to my team and they sort of say, well, how am I going to know it's working? I'll often recommend just the simplest possible geo test, right? Let's just take two cities, right?
Yeah,
Heavy up in one with the thing you want to test and then leave the other one alone, but like heavy up 3 times higher than you would normally heavy up, right? Like literally slam it, but slam only a small city. And then you can look back because with the identity information, you'll be able to know, right? You can do the
yeah.
matchbacks. And
And,
so
and again, I will say, like, there's enough people out there in the space now in the attribution world, right? You have Claritas, you have Podscribe, so maybe you don't have the budget to be on an MMM model, but you can still see how audio as a channel is performing for you, right? And again, I think it's about tagging everything you can afford to tag, because if you can see the ROI, it's going to lead to more investment and more continued orders coming through the channel, right? So I'm a big believer in the audio channel. I got my stuff started at Global/Westwood One, so I'm a radio guy at heart. I know it works, and I will continue beating the drum to drive the awareness for audio in the marketing. I don't know if I can change MMM models, but I'm going to keep trying, and our industry peers will do the same. But we're all just trying to raise the profile of audio, right? I think that's the end. At the end of the day, it's a matter of just it does have provide its value for advertisers, and it's just about educating the market on that.
So what else should we have talked about today that we didn't cover as it relates to the opportunity that lies within programmatic audio?
I think the only thing I would add is just talking about the whole audience targeting within DSPs, and really audio as a channel has evolved rapidly, right? It's become more addressable as we talked about the data signals that are coming through. I think advertisers in 2026, at least the ones that I think will win in the long term, are ones that are going to truly look at this omni-channel audience approach and say, okay, how do I know I'm hitting this consumer across CTV, display, and audio? How do I ensure waste, making sure that you're not reaching that same consumer, or the frequency is not over serving that consumer at the end of the day across channels? There's so many different ways to hit a consumer in today's media landscape, right? There's social, there's video, there's display and audio. Let audio do its thing. Make sure audio is getting a proper seat in that whole audience profile build out. And then make sure you're using each channel properly to drive the best ROI for your client. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's trying to make sure the client is happy, driving that purchase intent and the ROI to continue coming back. And I think it's a matter of people looking at audio as a digital channel now and not this reach and efficiency channel it's been historically, right? I think the technology's finally caught up. It's time advertisers really lean into it. And I think the interesting piece is when you talk to agencies, they all understand that the MMM models are flawed, but yet we don't see that change, right? So it's a matter of how do we take some of the technology that was built for audio and have it get its proper recognition within some of these interagency models, because a lot of agencies are actually building out their own modeling on top of these, right, to truly show the performance by channel. So I think those are the big things that we didn't cover yet so far.
Great. One final follow-up question, because you mentioned the word consumer a couple of times, but with addressability, you have the ability to hit the B2B audience as well, right? When you
Sure.
add the
Yeah.
addressability, it's not just a consumer for B2C, it could be that same consumer of business services or business products, right? And
Sure.
you do certainly see a significant footprint of B2B advertising and audio. So I just want to make
Sure.
sure that if there are any special best practices in B2B, that did we cover off on those?
I mean, for us we've actually seen a tremendous success story in B2B where we took an omni-channel approach between streaming and podcasting last year with a client of ours, where we had a fluid CPM across both channels, right? So we would actually take real-time insights from our partners at Claritas and see which channel is driving the best ROI month to month, week to week, and we could optimize accordingly. I think historically as an industry, we had seen that podcasting and streaming were two separate buys on a media plan, and because the CPMs were so different, that publishers didn't want to take that middle ground and let people maneuver from one to another, where we did little bit of a managed service programmatic activation, as we talked about. But the B2B client tapping into the podcast space for the first time and having that fluid CPM saw a 25-to-1 ROI, which was a massive sales increase. And I think, again, it's using their first party audience data, which, again, you talked about how do you attack them a little differently. They layered that onto the campaign. They built lookalike audiences on top of that. So they knew when they were spending dollars with us that they were reaching that B2B customer at the end of the day and not having waste. And it led to tremendous ROI for them, right? So I think it's a matter of truly looking at knowing your audience and knowing who your customer is. I'll say customer instead of consumer because B2B, but I think it's really about knowing that profile in and out, which this client absolutely did, and then trying new things out and seeing what performs, because you want to be driving purchases at the end of the day. And whatever channel that's coming through, you need to be able to be nimble and not set it and forget it. So I think that would just be the one thing I would say from a B2B standpoint that we saw a lot of success with here at DAX.
Great, great. Well, lots of great insights, lots of great homework assignments for folks
Sure.
trying to plan their media for 2026. I appreciate having you on, Brian.
Yes. Thank you, Kevin. It was great.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.